The fallout from the war in Ukraine has brought a focus on a part of Russia you may not know well. It's called Kaliningrad. It has a population of 1 million, and it sits between Lithuania, Poland and the Baltic Sea. And while it's separate from the rest of Russia, it's strategically important.
The military presence is huge. It's pretty much one big military base.
Russia's Baltic Fleet is there, so are tens of thousands of Russian troops. And now it's the latest pressure point between Russia and the West.
No blockade of Kaliningrad is taking place. It is simply that since last weekend, sanctions have come into force on some of the goods included in the so-called sanctions package.
The EU introduced a raft of sanctions after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Lithuania finds itself at the front line of imposing them. It's brought in a ban on some goods being transported by rail between Kaliningrad and the rest of Russia. And this warning has followed.
Russia will certainly respond to such hostile actions. Their consequences will have a serious negative impact on the population of Lithuania.
We don't know what those consequences may be, but we know about the sanctions. The Times reports a choking off of the supply of items such as iron, washing machines, crockery and perfume. The governor of Kaliningrad says 40 to 50% of rail imports are affected. But Russia's reaction may not only be about that. There's also the expansion of the military alliance, NATO.
I am sure that they are scared because of Swedish and Finnish membership in NATO, because the Baltic Sea will be more or less surrounded by peaceful NATO countries.
Kaliningrad borders 2 NATO members, Lithuania and Poland. Also nearby are Latvia, Estonia, Germany and Denmark. And now, in response to the invasion of Ukraine, Sweden and Finland have applied to join too. Amongst all of these countries is Kaliningrad and the Russian military. And as tensions rise, there's a tension on the border between Lithuania and Poland. It's known as the Suwalki Gap, and it separates Kaliningrad from Russia's ally, Belarus. Politico has called it the most dangerous place on earth. Now, I may be overstating things, but the broader point still stands. Russia has already invaded one sovereign nation, and one former Russian prime minister and now Putin critic says if Ukraine falls, the Baltic states will be next. And here's the journalist Leonid Ragozin again.
In theory, Russia, if it goes to war with the entire bloc of Western countries, it could be targeting this particular area.
Now, we don't know Russia's intentions, but any attack on Lithuania brings with it high stakes, as BBC Russian explains.
I believe now everyone in Kremlin realizes that this attempt will lead to a war with a country which is a NATO member and an EU member.
Russia knows that war with one NATO member means war with all NATO members. And on whether that could happen, here's the BBC's Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg.
I don't think that is very likely, but the fact that some people are talking about this and pushing for this, that shows just how bad relations have become between Russia and the West.
Relations are bad, and they're getting worse. NATO says it's responded by significantly strengthening its readiness to protect and defend all allies. That means battle groups being deployed in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. And so, not for the first time, Kaliningrad finds itself part of a global power struggle that's playing out in Europe. During the Second World War, it was known as Königsberg and controlled by Nazi Germany. Russia, though, captured it. And after the war, it would become Kaliningrad and part of Russia. Now, over 75 years later, Russia's relations with Western Europe are again being reset. And while a military escalation is not expected, there is now a heavily militarized part of Russia surrounded by NATO members and in part by NATO troops. Combine that with Russia's recent statements, and we understand why the focus on Kaliningrad is increasing right now.